Hey, thanks for joining in on our live stream this evening. My name is Eric Gunderson. I'm one of the COPA board members and a Cirrus SR-22 pilot. Glad you could join us this afternoon and evening. We have the great honor and privilege to have Mark Baker with AOPA. He's the president of AOPA here to kind of discuss what's going on with the unleaded and the general aviation fuel unleaded programs coming up. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring in Mark here, and hopefully he can come in nice and clear. Mark, thanks for having us. Yeah.
Hey, Eric, thanks for allowing me to be here.
Perfect. We got your audio.
Good.
So I wasn't supposed to moderate this today, so I kind of threw this together last minute. So appreciate you working it with me here. How about I just throw it over to you? You can kind of give us a status update of what AOPA is doing for all us general aviation folk out here. I don't think I've talked to anybody that really wants to keep lead in our fuel. So how about I throw it over to you? You can give us a status update, and then of course we're going to go ahead and jump right into questions that we had. That we put a Q&A list out there on our COPA forums, and we'll kind of attack those one by one. I'm sure some of them will mix in together. So I'll throw it over to you. Thanks again for joining us, Mark.
Thanks, Eric, and I really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with COPA members, which I know are very devoted aviators and got some great aircraft. I've been a native Minnesotan, so I've kind of grown up with the Clapmore brothers, and I've known them a long time. I consider them both to be friends. Interesting time. But, I want to talk a lot about the fuels, but I'd also like to give you just a few minute update of what's going on in AOPA. We celebrate our 83rd anniversary here in May since 1939, protecting the freedom to fly. It's an interesting mission I've been involved in now and leading it for the last 9 years, and only the fifth CEO for that whole 83-year period of time. And having owned a bunch of airplanes myself, over 100 different ones, I consider myself a devoted aviator, and I still have 4 or 5 piston airplanes today that I really enjoy the heck out of. And I plan to keep us going for as long as I can to see AOPA through for another 83 years. But there's a bunch of things I want to share with you tonight about all the things that are important to AOPA and aviators in this country, and frankly, international AOPA with over 80 countries, that we work hard to maintain that access. And that access comes with some risks and some politics and some different interests sometimes. And yet the prevalence of AOPA and pulling the aviation community together to find a way to keep these 5,000 public use airports through the advocacy efforts that we have in DC and a unique Air Safety Institute to try and keep us safer in aviation, which thanks to you and others, we've just come through this safest year in general aviation's history ever, with more hours flown. And you know that because you've been out flying. General aviation is booming through this COVID time. But one of our biggest things that we started out with half a dozen years ago now was getting young people involved in flying, the aviator's life, where they get rusty and come back. How do they afford to fly through flying clubs? And how do we get young people interested in flying in the first place? So we started on this thing called You Can Fly a number of years ago. And, we offer a free high school STEM curriculum now. It's in more than 10,000 kids are actually taking that class as an elective this year. 45% of these kids are from minority groups, and nearly 25% of them are young women taking these very difficult STEM curriculum elective from the 9th to the 12th grade. And in 44, now would be 45 states. Hawaii just joined on board this week. We've also used donors' money that comes to the foundation. We've given 450 scholarships in the last couple of years, over $5 million, for nearly $4 million out there. And we're always trying to find a way to help flight schools be more successful. It shouldn't take 70, 80 hours to get your pilot license. How can we do it faster? And instead of going through the 4th or 5th instructor and starting over, working hard with that. But, it's one of the challenges that we're involved in immediately, and working with a lot of flight schools to find a way to help people get it done lower cost, safer, and faster. But flying clubs is a way to keep young people flying and anybody flying. We started 200 brand new flying clubs. Again, all this came from people that have supported us through donors, not just our membership. And finally, our Rusty Pilot Program. Over 10,000 folks have come back through the Rusty Pilot Program offered at AOPA to members to learn how to get back in the game, new to GPS, because in many cases people have been gone for 10 or 15 or 20 years to do that. So as we think about all the things that AOPA has been really leading, whether it was a basic med or how we can update our aircraft, and how we used ADS-B to do it inexpensively and lower the cost. We're all things that I'm really proud of that we do, but there's always something out there, and we're trying to get more DPEs as I've seen such a huge growth in private pilot's licenses. We still have the same number of DPEs we had when we were doing only 15,000 private pilots a year just a few years ago, and now we're back close to 35,000 brand new pilots. You know, we got 70,000 people flying with basic med. So aviation's booming. We're going to keep pushing about, you know, some of you are flying Cirrus piston, and some of you will be flying Cirrus jets. And I have talked to a number of Cirrus jet owners that have found out, even though the plane takes the same footprint, some of the bigger FBOs charge 10x, 350 bucks a night to park outside for the same footprint you had when you're driving a piston. And so we want to have transparency. We want to keep working on how we keep that access to our 5,000 public airports so it doesn't become prohibitively expensive. But let's talk about gas. And I have spent the last 18 months really diving really deep into this issue that's been going on for 40 or 50 years since the car gas guys moved to unleaded in the 70s. And we tripped through catalytic converters, those of you that are old enough like me that use really poor engines and really had a difficult time running through that. And I grew up, you know, in the 60s siphoning car gas in my dad's pickup truck that was leaded gas. Worked really good in the motorcycle for that. But it is a time that it's clear to me that leaded fuel's future is certainly not long. And when we came out with the EAGLE program a couple months ago, it was really saying no later than 2030. There's only one lead plant in the world that makes all the TLL for all of AVGAS. And again, I got to help people size this issue. And I've talked to every refiner at the C level, you know, COO, CEO level that make the AVGAS in the 9 refineries we have today. And we burn 180 million gallons of AVGAS here in the US, which is equivalent to about 3 hours of car gas in the country. Only 9 refineries want to deal with it. Once they become a leaded refinery, they can't mitigate that fuel. It's not fungible with any other pipeline or truck or rail car or anything. Once it goes into the lead world, it's stuck. And we all know that lead has a history in the endangerment finding from EPA, which we still haven't seen, but it could be tomorrow, could be a month from now, could be 6 months from now, but no later than that. We'll come out and say, frankly, no amount of lead, airborne lead, is at a safe level. None. It'll take a couple, 3 years for that to be digested through the rulemaking process and move forward. But again, with only one lead plant, I've lived through California changes and retailing before. They take their own time, but California always is pretty aggressive, as they're being with Santa Clara County right now and trying to completely move lead off the field. We're still working hard with the DOTs, Department of Transportation, and the FAA to find a way to protect that, because I consider it to be a huge safety issue, which you might even drag the NTSB in to say this could be a huge safety of flight issue if somebody misfuels with either auto fuel or 94, particularly if you got a big engine Cirrus or Bonanza or Baron, whatever. It could be really an emergency that could get created. Let's think about how to do this in a safe program kind of way. Now let's talk about a little bit about GAMI, and we'll jump into that here in a little bit. I've known George Rowley and Tim for years and years and years. I consider him to be an expert on detonation. I'm talking about fuel detonation, you know, between the turbocharging work that they've done, the injectors that they've done. They've been studying cylinders and spark ignition systems probably as much as anybody. And so I've always gone to him for my own questions about that. But this is also, and this is probably one of the biggest takeaways I want for everybody, this would be one of the biggest STCs of significance ever given. And we know the STCs have been given to both Swift and GAMI for the smaller engines, which can also run on 94 or in many cases autogas. But these big bore engines that put out a lot of horsepower have to be able to run at very cold temperatures, very hot temperatures, very thin atmospherics, you know, get hot start, cold starts, all these kind of things that are really the reason we enjoy flying high-speed airplanes and go the distance, because these fuels are pretty good. And they've worked from a per pound as a very safe, consistent fuel since World War II, frankly. And yet we're the last standing user of airborne lead particulate in the world, general aviation. And if it would have been easy, I always say this in line, it'd have been done a long time ago. And my relationship with George and Swift, talked to both of them today. I'm involved with the FAA daily or 3 times a week, trying to find out how we can keep the process moving as fast as possible. We also are very close to the API, which is the Associated Petroleum Institute, because whether it's Chevron, Exxon, or Phillips, the very largest builders of AVGAS we have today, we're going to need to figure out how to make this stuff. And Lyondale and Shell, whoever. It's one thing to get it STC, which we'll talk about a little bit, and I think Eric's going to ask me some questions specifically about how, when, why. It's one thing to get it approved from an STC, but you also have to get it made, distributed, and everybody, the largest users, have to be comfortable with it. The insurance companies, the haulers, all of those pieces. So it's going to take time. And that's what the 2030 date was meant to do, is to say no later than. It's going to take time. If they had the STC tomorrow, it's going to be a couple of years before you get it through the pipelines. And that's probably at best. But we have this EAGLE group, which is meant to pull people together to understand the logistics, the supply chain, the distribution. So we've got 60-some groups that are represented on this, because it really requires communication to understand the timelines. And again, the petroleum producers are on there. GAMI is part of EAGLE. Swift is part of EAGLE. Phillips 66 is part of EAGLE. And Av Fuel and Titan and all the distribution guys are part of this. So we're all trying to work together to make sure that we don't have gaps in supply. Because that's one of my biggest concerns, frankly, is if one of the refineries decided that they're not going to participate anymore in the lead fuel, we'd be in big trouble to try and get enough fuel. The cost of moving this fuel by trucks could add dollars per gallon, depending on which place did not have fuel while we make this transition. So that's one of the reasons why I tend to be, and my nature is to be pretty aggressive and pretty fast, and build a lot of retail companies and try to go as fast as possible. But this being the biggest piston STC of any type, it was really important to get it right. And the FAA certainly has the taste of Boeing in its mouth about doing things right. Not necessarily slow, but they've never been fast. But we support the idea, let's get it right. And so we can stand behind this and not have an AD that comes out, for some unknown reason on some particular compatibility or so. Now, do I personally believe there are fuels that are going to answer this call? The answer is yes. I've seen enough to believe that some way, somehow, whether it's GAMI, Swift, or one of the other major producers out of Pathy, I believe there's enough energy going toward this that we are going to have a successful fuel. I talked to the other day, the company and family that burns 2% of all the AVGAS in the country. Close to 20 DC-4s in Alaska. They burn just under 3 million gallons of AVGAS a year. So it's pretty important to them, and we want to work closely with them to get that done. But I think one of the things people don't understand is the associations are not here to get in the way. They're here to support the activity. And, I spend enough time around DC to know that there are sinkholes that evolve and things get slowed down. But I like to believe between the FAA and EPA, we've come together in an inroad that says, let's go as fast as we possibly can, but we have to get this right. So I think with that, Eric, you want to start asking some of those questions? That's kind of where I'd like to kind of go to. Does that kind of cover the baseline, Eric, as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, I appreciate the update on that, and kind of getting, I think what you are mainly touching on is it's complicated, right? There's a lot of factors that play into us. I think at the end of the day, us individual COPA members and just general aviation pilots out there, are operators, we just want the gas, but there is there are politics involved, there are distribution, and there's money involved, right? And there are a lot of different players, but at the same time, we don't have. We're 3 minutes worth of auto gas, right? So we're small players in a big world. So I think what if you look through the questions that were on our Q&A, a lot of them are related to GAMI. And I know you're very supportive of GAMI, as you were saying in your opening remarks. is there what can we as COPA members do to support GAMI, to help push this over the finish line? Ultimately, it's kind of a chicken. To me, there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg problem here. It's like without the fuel, it's hard to get the STC, and without the STC, it's hard to get the fuel out there. So, what is there anything that we as COPA members, as AOPA members, can do to help George and GAMI and get that one across the line?
I think it's a really good question, and at this point in time, I'd say we're going to keep that powder a little bit dry. But I think what's really important, particularly as you do live in California, is attend your airport meetings, because it's starting to show up on agendas everywhere, from Madison, Wisconsin to the Hamptons to Oregon, over California, about should we outlaw lead tomorrow or allowing distribution of it. And the confusion that the market has brought on here doesn't 91, 94 answer the need for fuel. We don't need to have this stuff anyway. And it's always important to break it down to people that 70% of the gas is burned by about 30% of these airplanes. And it could be 60%, but it's in that direction. That have the need to have the 100 alternatives, and the safety that goes along with what those engines could do, run on an octane not built for them, is something that only you pilots can do to your local neighborhood, because people are concerned about it. They read about airborne lead particulate, and it sounds like a really bad word because it's a 4-letter word and it's real. We don't have good science on our side, other than to say we've been doing it for a long time, and but we're committed to change. I think that's a really important for the community to be out there at the airport meetings, informing, communicating that we are moving away from it, but we have to do it safely, smartly. As far as helping GAMI and their STCs and SWIFT or whomever else, I think that is kind of the role of these associations you belong to. COPA is one of them, and the AOPA. But we have now in our affiliate group, I think over 200 different groups that go onto the AOPA website that belong to this, to look at the website as it gets updated either daily or weekly. And we are kind of the distribution source of all the latest information as it's going on. So staying informed is always important. When it comes to the politics involved with getting the GAMI fuel approved, there's been some changes at the FAA. I don't think that was really necessarily the big problem. I think there are nervous people. I mean, you do an STC that's going to be used by a lot of people. They want to make sure that the paperwork's right, the process has been checked. It's been, double checked. I mean, again, if you're just come out of the FAA and you live through Boeing, you're pretty gun shy. And it's not the same, but this will be the biggest one affecting more airplanes than Boeing.
Yeah, again, I think that's one of those things where it's complicated. As I've dug into this more and more, George was actually able to come to our migration this past year in Scottsdale and gave us kind of an update on things. I know he's going to be, he was at Sun and Fun, and he'll be at Oshkosh as well, as will you. Do you think that there's any other, or can you tell us if there's any other fuels that are remotely close, like G100UL? Are there other ones coming out there? Is there going to be some competition by chance?
Well, I think so. Clearly Swift has done a nice job with their 94 fuel. And for those engines that can use it, it's proven to be very good, clean. That's one of the things that George and Swift both claim and hope, that by getting rid of the metals in the fuel, you might get longer life between oil changes and spark plug changes, which we look forward to. And there appears to be some evidence of that around the Swift fuel. And Swift is working really hard. I talked to Chris DeCosta this morning again. Stay in touch with him regularly. And they're working heads down to try and get their R100 through the same kind of process in terms of compatibilities and STC program that they're working through. Their timeline has been announced to be sometime later this year. They'll have that fuel. I'm going to go visit them in Indiana in May, kind of see how they're coming along. But we'd like to see someone get across the finish line. The PAFI program has a couple of candidates that are still working through a couple of ideas and tests that they're working on. So it's not a one-horse race at this moment. it just appears that GAMI is by far in the lead.
And I think that's part of the COPA membership, concern is like they feel, seems like they're in the lead. They are in the lead. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. Without these other ones coming to the table and being as transparent, maybe as George has been, causes some confusion out there as well, potentially. I think a few things with the EAGLE program, I know the COPA members have been voicing their opinions on our forums, there's some discussion of 100 VLL, which I guess is very low lead, was in some of that documentation. Can you speak to that at all? Why is that even a consideration potentially? Is that just a transitional fuel potentially?
That was some of the thinking that some of the petroleum producers put forth. As I understand the VLL science, it was call it 1 gram per gallon is VLL of lead, and kind of normal low lead is up to 2 grams per gallon. And the facts are somewhere around 50% of our fuel is already made that way, but it's not available to be made in all the refineries because of the different particulate that goes into that refinery and where they get their crude from and how they can distill it. So it's not a alternative for all the refineries. And we need all 9 refineries right now to make the fuel we have. So it's one of the first problems. And, I think many of us in the association world, that I consider good friends, Jack Belton, Pete Von Zedboll, and NBA, Gamma, and many others, felt like, we really don't want to do a half a step by taking on this 2030. And again, when we already probably have a significant part of this fuel, how much lead would we really reduce in the atmosphere? So while it sounds kind of good, it doesn't really pan out the way we think we should be approaching this. And again, think about the supply chain. How fragile is one plant in the world making this stuff?
Yeah, and that's, I think, the big concern. It's not just that one plant making the lead. It's the EPA and the current administration, and while those things might be, they are what they are, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on. It is a perfect storm to maybe push this over the finish line as well. Again, we go back to, or at least I do, it's complicated. There's a lot that goes into it. As far as leadership at AOPA, I know you're involved and a number of other members of the board and staff. Is there anything with regards to the kind of we're seeing them maybe as roadblocks for G100UL? I think it's part of this technical review board that came out of the 737 MAX program. Is there anything that we can do to, write a congressman or fill out a letter to help push this through, not just G100UL, but because I assume Swift and others are they going the PATHY route or are they going the STC route? I think it's a little bit of both, right?
Well, Swift, as far as I know right now, is only going out of the STC route, like they did with their 94. Gotcha. And I'm pretty sure they dropped out of PATHY, as did GAMI, for some of the technical reasons and proprietary reasons, and they thought it was not going to work for them. So I think there's a couple of things that need to be put on the table. Once an STC is granted for a significant percentage of the fleet, even if it's not the DC 7, 6, 4, whatever, a significant part of the fleet, we still have a ways to go to get fleet-wide approval. Fleet-wide approval may be by default because you have an STC, which means you will have to buy the STC, get it put in your logbook, and make sure your engine airframe combination is on that list. So you'll have to purchase that from either GAMI, like you do today, Swift today, to burn their 94, as you would there. To get a fleet-wide approval kind of changes that. And there's one of the methods is ASTM, but there's also a thing called industry consensus that can take the place of ASTM, because there are certain oils for your aircraft today that don't have ASTM, they have SAE, other ways to get an industry consensus that this is a safe, good fuel and can be made in quantities that are economic and consistent. So the next step will be, and one of the reasons why you're going to end up asking all of our members to write to the congressmen and their senators later on, is to make sure that this is expedited at the top of the FAA's list. I think they're doing it right now. We just had a change at the top of FAA. Many of us have worked closely with Steve Dixon or Michael Weirda before. We've got a new leadership in transition there. So we've got to do some educating about how important this is there in the Department of Transportation. And yet we are trying to make this as the number one priority, period. Because we see the biggest threat to GA and the biggest concern that we have by running amok with the communities that we fly into and enjoy, because of the communication, like you said accurately, it's complicated, very complicated. But admitting that we're going to move on and having the fuels get through as fast as possible is something that we need to educate everybody, including your people that represent you in DC.
And being living in California, I'm in Southern California, not too far from Santa Monica, but it made a lot of news. And I actually stayed up and listened to the whole Santa Clara County, Reed Hillview discussion. And as kind of, not to give California a bad name, but as California does, so does the nation in some regards, right? And so, California's all with the California Air Resources Board with cars has kind of led the way to 50 state emissions, and I kind of see the same thing happening here with AVGAS and unleaded. With that, I mean, GAMI has said that they want to push and focus distribution on California first. Is the industry looking at doing the same thing with the EAGLE program? Once a program comes into place, where will those resources be focused? Will it be California?
Well, clearly that's going to be a big part of the EAGLE program. Is if we get the fuel approved, by what date? Where can we start? Which refineries are going to be able to build this fuel, or blenders? It might be in some cases like some suggestions might be able to use some of the race car blenders that can do the smaller batch stuff to get started, or some of the big refineries may jump in. Those are all things that we need to sort out once the STC has been granted, so they know what the fuel is, so they know what the additives required and what their ability to make it in those areas, in refiners or blenders. So those are the big discussions where EAGLE really matters to us, is to make sure the whole thing is coordinated. Like I said, my biggest concern is somebody just gets up tomorrow morning and says, I'm not going to make this fuel anymore because it's kind of painful in small volume. But it's really important to us and to the communities that we serve, and business people, tourism / training, the airlines. I think we've done a pretty good job of getting everybody involved and understand how important this fuel is and how critical it is. But it could be really dicey if we lost that access to that fuel. California, and I've lived in California, both Southern and Northern California in my business life, and they tend to take things pretty fast. I've seen that happen when it was lead solder and catalytic converters and lawnmowers, and now no lawnmowers that can burn gas. Before the market's usually ready, and to try and force their way. And that can be some real interruptions in supply, which I've lived through before out there. They're not necessarily wrong. We just need to if we can all do it together at the right time.
Yeah, I agree. It's not, maybe, like I said, I don't think I've met a pilot that likes lead in their fuel. So if we could get it out, the sooner the better. And if again, it's something politically is going to come to a head here. I think it's going to be a political one. Be it California or EPA. But I think you bring up a very, there is a single point of failure, in the supply chain with the lead manufacturer. And do you have any insights onto how much, like if that were to stop, how much of a supply that they do keep in the tanks, so to speak?
Well, I understand there's about a year's supply here in the U.S. of TLL. I'm sure it goes up and down. But there's only, I believe, 3 tankers that even move this stuff around the world. We still burn the largest percentage of AVGAS in the world, right here in North America, including Mexico, which gets most of its fuel out of California. And all the fuel out of Alaska comes out of California for the most part. And Canada has a little bit of production, but we burn most of it. And people in Europe are very concerned about this. This is a worldwide problem because there are meridians and Cirrus all over the world, Australia, and so we're trying to coordinate with all the international AOPAs, all the manufacturers around the world, to make sure that we're communicating about what we see as the timeline. and then, you know, as they work through Eagle, the rollout, what it might look like, because it won't be a switch on, switch off. And the fuel has to be what they call fungible, which means it can work with the current 100 low load, because you'll have some of that in your tank and in the tank trucks. And then it's got to be able to be moved back and forth while you fly around the country and burn both fuels. So they've studied that and they've tested it in most of these cases. So, but it's a really important piece of the rollout.
I appreciate you bringing up the international portion of it, because that was one of the questions I was going to ask you. You know, EAGLE is just an FAA and United States program, if I'm not mistaken. Is there a similar program, or is there the potential for EASA or anybody else internationally to join into that program?
Yeah, the EASA and the rest of the world are looking to us to lead, you know, this issue, and again through international AOPA. But EASA and GAMI has, you know, fuel offices all over Europe and Asia, as does NBAA and others. We're working hard to communicate the timelines as we become aware of them, because they have even more fragile fuel supply line in many of these smaller countries around the world, where, you know, they're concerned that in Africa or Brazil, and where's this fuel going to come from if we don't have access to TLL?
Yeah, we've actually had a couple of COPA members. John Bone, specifically Captain John Bone, actually flew his Cirrus around the world. I think he's done it a few times now. And he actually had to ship, you know, barrels of this stuff to Russia and other, you know, other countries, because it's just not available.
Right.
And so that was just 100 low lead. And so I think with distribution too, there's an opportunity with getting the lead out. You mentioned that there's only a few tankers in the whole world that can ship this stuff, and this stuff is you're referring to the lead. By hopefully going to unleaded, it opens up those distribution networks and supply chain, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
But it appears so. You know, we don't know exactly what it's going to be like. You know, obviously we don't want to mix it with car fuel, because we don't want car fuel or 94 to be mixed in with a, call it 100 of any type, because it'll reduce the octane. But it should make the world better place for these trucks that can be flushed and used, and pipelines potentially that could be flushed and used like we already do with different kinds of fuels. But lead is a contaminant that they don't allow any mitigation.
And again, you know, this lead stuff, again, nobody wants it in there, and then all the more reason to get it out. And I think it does simplify things. Any closing remarks that you want to add? I know there's a number of questions that we've a lot of the questions we had were related to GAMI, and we hope to actually have George come on to onto one of these webinars that we're doing for COPA and get his you know, his take of things as well. But and I know there's maybe some more questions that we can send your way. Anything you can, any resources you want to send, you know, point our members to, like you were saying, kind of daily, weekly updates on?
Yeah, the AOPA website. Of course, you're all members anyway, but you don't have to be to get the fuel update. And we take it very seriously about getting every update that we can posted up there, so you can become the most informed. Because the community counts on you as aviators to be the most informed about what's going on here. How bad is this stuff? How fast is it going to go away? You know, what are you doing about it? And I think the more you can be informed, the more helpful you can be to the community to make sure we keep these airports going while we get the transition up and go on. I think that's so critical. And I think, you know, from staying informed, but, you know, there are a lot of different interests here that are all trying to get to the same goal, which is get the lead out. And yet I ask, not for your patience, because I'm not patient about this either. I want to go as fast as possible. We have to do it safely, do it smart. And, you know, George is a guy that I've known for, like I said, a good long time. I think he's smart. He studied this well, but I think Swift has got some good ideas too. Maybe Phillips and a few others are working on stuff, but we're going to need everybody pulling together to do the distribution, the comfort. You know, we'll be doing we're planning to do a demonstration by using a twin engine airplane with, you know, 520s or 550s on it. One side will be burning while they're rolling the fuel up, low lead, and the other side will be burning whatever fuel is available to us within STC, because we want to run and test the engine temperatures and run all stuff and run it for our fly-ins and all those kind of things, so we can start building confidence in the new fuel as it becomes available. So I look forward to talking to all of you at either Oshkosh or one of our Hangouts fly-ins this fall. Staying together on this issue is really important. Thanks.
Well, thank you again for joining us and taking the time out of your day. And just so you know, I think there's a number of COPA members, myself included, that would volunteer to be a part of that beta test of this, of getting this let out. I know, especially with young kids myself, and being in California, the risk is real. Not just from a health perspective, but from it being
great thing to do.
Just there's the risk of it disappearing, and we appreciate you heading this up. And despite what people have been saying, out there, late to the game, all these sort of things, it's complicated. And so I appreciate you taking the time out of your day and taking the leadership perspective or position on this, and anything that COPA can do. The forums are always available for a representative or yourself to join us. And thanks again for joining us tonight. We'll see you.
Yeah.